I say, Jenkins, it's awfully good to control the French land. What's that noise?
La here wishes to kill something.
Hey, retourne à l'âge de pierre.
Get off my lawn! The RTS genre peaked over the course of a year and a half with the release of 2 games, but the focus on today's video is on just one of them, Age of Empires 2, which despite coming out a whopping 21 years ago is currently the most played real-time strategy game on Steam. Developers from all over the world had a full 10-year window to develop an RTS for Valve's digital distribution platform that was superior, and failed. It's just that good. Much like my last review, it's therefore entirely pointless to ask the question, does this hold up? As commenting on this title in the first place is like an amateur art critic visiting the Sistine Chapel and yelling to everyone, "Hey, this Michelangelo guy's criminally underrated, you should check him out!" I've covered the genesis of both the RTS genre and Age of Empires as a series in a previous video, but the gist is that Ensemble Studios promised Microsoft a second game. When they discovered they couldn't make one of the quality they wanted, they didn't just go ahead and release it and call it a day like most people do. Instead, they reskinned the failed effort and made it an expansion pack to the first title in the series. Since this was well received, Microsoft graciously granted them another year and they hired a pile of new people to help meet that deadline, with the game's design still helmed by the incomparable Bruce Shelley. The result was definitely the quality they wanted. The Age of Kings sold 2 million copies in 3 months and drew universal acclaim, improving on every aspect of the original and shifting the time frame from ancient history to the dawn of the much more popular medieval age. It's on Wikipedia's list of video games considered the best. That's as much of a critical consensus as you can get. The Conqueror's expansion was released soon after and was named the expansion pack of the year, adding new units, technologies, civilizations and campaigns to the mix, including the glorious Aztecs, who I always turtled in games with, annoying everyone. Microsoft had also enabled patching at this point, so the end product was a refined and improved version of the original that sold like hotcakes yet again. Fresh off this success, the team then created a well-received spin-off game called Age of Mythology that introduced a 3D engine and signaled a move away from the traditional two-dimensional top-down and isometric RTS games of the 90s. That wasn't the end for Age of Empires 2 though. After surviving the closure of its MSN Gaming Zone servers, the community refused to let go of their multiplayer fixation and moved on to other services like Game Ranger. For 6 long years they continued to prefer the second title in the series over both its graphically superior spin-off and its direct sequel, despite both being solid games in their own right that also sold millions. Then in 2012, a group of fans released Forgotten Empires, an unofficial expansion for the Conquerors that also added performance and stability updates by default. This had everyone scrambling for their old CDs in disused attics and sock drawers, because amazingly there still wasn't a digital version of Age of Empires 2. Enter Hidden Path Entertainment, maintainers of Counter-Strike Source and co-developers of the massively popular Global Offensive. They were contracted by Microsoft Studios to remaster the game for modern computers, and thus Age of Empires 2 was reborn as the HD edition. A divisive and buggy release that split the community. Many were happy to see the classic title on Steam, but others lamented how poorly it ran compared to the original with all its community fixes. There also wasn't any new content, with the developers adopting a less is more strategy that I personally approved of when it came to preserving the game. A little bit of polish here and there to ward off the hands of time is good, but it all gets a bit ship of Theseus if you start replacing core elements. Skybox Labs were the next developer enlisted to cosplay as Ensemble Studios, but they instead teamed up with the newly formed Forgotten Empires to produce an HD version of the Forgotten Empires, simply titled The Forgotten. That's right, The Forgotten, based on Forgotten Empires by Forgotten Empires. Forgettable? Forget about it. The move to add new story DLC to a 13-year-old game was praised, but the content itself received mixed reviews. The new factions were appreciated, but the lack of any new voice acting or music didn't sit well with the fans. Nor did the apparent difficulty spike. This is where my biggest issues with the modern incarnations of the game start to arise. I tried to record an example of skirmish mode and was promptly turned into a pincushion by an early rush from the merciless HD edition AI that I had unwittingly set to hardest. Fortunately, if you're brand new to the genre, the original AI still exists to mollycoddle you through the opening campaigns. Despite its problems, the HD edition continued receiving updates to improve stability and performance. And along came the African Kingdoms in 2015. This time there was voice acting. And while praise wasn't universal, it led to a third DLC, Rise of Virajas, a full 17 years after the game's initial release. By this point, the HD edition had been patched and tweaked to near perfection, and with all the DLC installed, this truly made it the definitive edition of Age of... Then Forgotten Empires released a definitive edition in 2019. This means there are now 3 ways to play Age of Empires 2. If you want the authentic experience, you can use the original CD version and patch it to work, or you can do the sensible thing and play the HD version that's more or less the same game now, but without the hassle and with additional DLC, for a price. After the standard entertaining cutscene, we're brought to an iconic menu featuring easily distinguished buttons in a medieval town. Learn to play as a shortcut to the first campaign, where you lead William Wallace and the Scottish people in their fight against the English oppressors. He treats you like you've suffered a serious head injury, yet only 13% of people who own the game on Steam have completed the tutorial. Sounds about right then. It gives you the basics nice and easy, carefully guiding people unfamiliar not just with Age of Empires but also the RTS genre as a whole, with enthusiastic encouragement from someone trying very hard to be Scottish.
Don't panic. Just click your soldiers.
Ah, laddie, that's a good wee hoose there. The history book gives you brief contextual information about all the factions you can play and the times they've lived in. I've consulted it once in the past 20 years. What? I'm not a history buff. The map editor makes a return from the first game and the options button does what it says on the tin. Or anvil in this case. The banner gives you credits too, which are a nice touch. The HD edition features Steam Workshop integration instead of a link to Zone.com, allowing for modding possibilities like the Arnold Schwarzenegger Taunt Pack.
It's not a tumor.
The multiplayer button lets you create and join games via an internal server browser, and that's what a lot of players will be hitting, as the multiplayer scene is still huge and amazing for a certain sort of obsessive and competitive weirdo whose constant complaints have helped ruin the entire. Single player gives you access to all the campaigns. Unlike your standard RTS, there's no one overarching narrative as seen through multiple factions. Instead, you guide a specific set of people over the course of what is usually a 6-level campaign set at a certain pivotal point in history. And boy do we have a lot of campaigns for you! There are 5 campaigns from the original Age of Kings release.
There are 3 campaigns from the Conquerors expansion. There are 6 campaigns from the Forgotten Empires fan expansion that was later turned into an official expansion. There are 4 campaigns from the African Kingdoms follow-up DLC expansion.
There are 4 That gives you over 170 levels to play through, so you can forget about interacting with the outside world ever again. No modern RTS comes close to that level of story-based campaign content, and with the way the genre has gone of late, I wouldn't hold my breath for one that will. So whether you briefly browse the campaigns and stick around for the multiplayer madness and metagaming as you robotically perform your APM fest, or hate everyone and just want to play with yourself like me, or aren't a friendless misanthrope and want to casually pick it up for a few hours once every blue moon with friends, AoE 2 has you covered. The graphics are timeless pixel art. The sound and music are suitably immersive, and the game itself sucks you in after mere minutes of playing the tutorial. The controls in RTS games were largely standardized by this point, so there's no need for an in-depth crash course in the game's operation when it introduces itself so well.
Right-click near the blue flag.
What's a right-click? How the hell do I do that? Suffice it to say, everything the first game did, this one does better. You construct buildings with villagers, each of them having a specific role in aiding your conquest. Often in campaigns, you'll instead be given a task of guiding a set number of troops from place to place, triggering scripted narrative events and updating objectives. You start in the Dark Ages this time, with limited building options and units. As with the previous game, each age opens up more buildings and technologies and subsequently more things to play with. The Feudal Age is reached after constructing 2 Dark Age buildings and amassing 500 food. It's also where things get interesting, with military upgrades at the blacksmith and the market allowing trade. Walls and towers soon become your friends, and the staple and archery range allow for a more mixed infantry and cavalry approach. There's also a host of upgrades at your other buildings to improve your economy. The Castle Age brings huge fortifications of death and siege units and allows you to build multiple town centres. And there's also the most annoying unit in there's a really bad... The best unit in the game, the monk. Monks can collect relics that generate gold in your monastery and can heal friendly units. They can't attack, but they can convert the enemy, which led to this entertaining image here.
Convert an elephant to Christianity.
At your castle, you could waste resources by training petards that blow themselves up to slightly damage buildings, and one of your faction's unique units. The Imperial Age further expands your upgrade potential and gives you access to your wonder, and to the weapon whose sound sends shivers of fear down any aspiring city builder's spine. Ah, the Trebuchet, destroyer of buildings. Each faction has a different tech tree, and what you have access to depends entirely on who you choose to play as. This encourages a variety of playstyles in the multiplayer game and gives a single-player campaign a different feel. It also changes the look and sound of your buildings and troops, even if functionally they're the same. Here's the Celts, now the Aztecs, and finally the British.
Brexit means Brexit.
There were 13 factions in the original game, with more being added in each expansion, meaning that there's now over twice that in the definitive edition. The differences are clearly stated and you can feel them as you play, but without it being too alienating. It's that similar yet different approach to units that has kept the game alive for so long, with balance maintained by everything having an expertly crafted hard counter available to almost all factions. Now to the elephant in the room. No, not you. Okay, I'll mention that some factions can train elephants. Happy? The definitive edition was released near the end of 2019, with pretty much everything redone with a new coat of polish, from graphics to sound to gameplays, menus and music. Great care was taken to maintain the feel of the original while updating it. It's an obvious love letter rather than a cash grab, with the goal being to revitalise and future-proof the look of the game in ways that the HD edition couldn't. Not all changes have been universally welcomed, like the excessive bloom and the interface and menus being altered and some voice acting not being up to snuff, but I appreciate the attempt at unification by including all the previous DLC and revamping those expansions so they can sit alongside the originals in a seamless fashion. At least that's what I would be saying if they got the balance right, which they haven't. The Age of Empires Definitive Edition AI is much harder than both the original AI and the HD Edition AI, so playing the opening campaign maps on standard to moderate is akin to tackling it on something above the hardest setting of the original game. Not only is that not in the spirit of the title, but if you're a newcomer to the RTS genre as a whole, you're going to get your face kicked in. The initial release was rushed out in time for Christmas, and was an unmitigated disaster, with bugs and issues as far as the eye could see, despite lots of testing. The most telling of these being how it ran on my machine when I first booted it up. Now, my computer is very long in the tooth, but it still has twice the minimum system requirements and matches the recommended specs on the store page. Clearly it shouldn't be running into issues. I had to turn all the graphics down to the bare minimum in order to have the game function, and the performance was still poor, so much that it put me off reviewing it until now. 3 months and a multitude of updates and hotfixes later, and the game is now finally playable, but I'm still running into issues, so your results may vary. I've sunk over 1,000 hours into Age of Empires 2 alone across all of its incarnations. With the new AI, I couldn't finish the second campaign on moderate. The level was designed for a specific AI with scripted actions. By replacing this AI with a much superior one and a larger population cap, the balance was obliterated. Even the HD edition didn't punish the player this much. Coincidentally, I was able to complete the same level on that version without any issues. Speaking of which, The HD edition and its DLC are still being sold separately on Steam. I'm all for choice, but clearly it shouldn't cost more than the remastered version for what now amounts to less content with worse graphics. The loose DLC should have been integrated into the original release by now, right? Oh, right. Sadly, the final campaigns are exclusive to the definitive edition. There is no indication from Forgotten Empires that there will be a backport, even as paid DLC. The same appears to be the case with simple gameplay improvements like the automatic reseeding of farms button, and enhancements to existing DLC. This means that older players of the game will have paid money for it at least 7 times now. I believe if Forgotten Empires can sort the AI and campaign scripting out and develop a stable game, they're onto an absolute winner here. Age of Empires 2 is still by far the greatest RTS on Steam, and you should definitely pick it up once all the issues have been ironed out. It's just a shame that the truly definitive version of the title lies somewhere between the HD and definitive editions. I live in the hope that this will be remedied, because this game is surely too good to mess up, right? I see the giant planks of wood you're constructing on the grass near my house, but if I hear a single sound, I'll demand that you get off my lawn. The RTS genre peaked over the course of a year and a half with the release of two games.